Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to WTM London's World Responsible Tourism Day 2019. We are celebrating 40 years of world travel market this year, and 25 years since WTM created Environment Awareness Day, which later became World Responsible Tourism Day some 13 years ago. Now, this is not a math lesson, but one where I am proud to say each year we are building on the success of the previous year. And yes, this is still the largest day of responsible tourism action in the world. But is it enough? As we say in our 40th anniversary video, with its emphasis on making change and the new age of explorers, now is the time to put our best foot forward, to really make that commitment at every level, from personal pledges to company solutions and industry initiatives. The focus of our programme across the portfolio has shifted towards providing solutions. We provide a platform for the sector to share its experience, your experience of what works and what doesn't work, to be a voice and industry leader through you and because of you. Our responsible tourism community is driving the change and leading through best practice and example. Our research shows that there is a growing demand for tourism to be more responsible. Almost 9 in 10 say responsible tourism is important to their business, while 7 in 10 consumers see sustainability as important when choosing a holiday. We are continuing to forge ahead as our responsible tourism agenda now extends across all 3 pillars of sustainability, from the environment to social and economic sustainability, and beyond to the challenge of child protection and encouraging understanding between people. WTM London is the world's largest responsible tourism event. It happens every year, but it is supported by a continuous focus and content programme which reflects the issues throughout the year. The issue of resilience grows in importance for all of us as citizens, as destinations, and as tourism businesses. After all, tourism takes place in other people's place. The security of our clients is reliant on local governments and their national agencies, and we must work with them. The discussions on resilience are diverse. This has been demonstrated through the sessions at WTM over the past 2 days, from safety and security to how to manage tourism growth sustainably and how to build resilience in cities. The World Responsible Tourism Awards being presented here later this morning will celebrate business achievements. It's a moment to reflect and give worthy accolades as we recognise those who the judges have identified as ones to watch, the emerging leaders in responsible tourism. They are great examples of how businesses have met the new challenge of transparently reporting their impacts and communicating them to stakeholders. There are 2 existential challenges confronting us as species: climate change and biodiversity. This year, on World Responsible Tourism Day, we are focused on climate and carbon emissions. Greta Thunberg, the school strikes, Extinction Rebellion set the context. As Greta said at the United Nations, change is coming, like it or not. We have a panel shortly on decarbonising travel and tourism, and one this afternoon on aviation. We are focusing on solutions, but need to acknowledge that the problem is getting worse, faster than we are fixing it. But there is hope, and there is the will and determination of businesses and individuals. Not only is this the right thing to do, but there is also a commercial opportunity for those who can develop to use alternative technologies and evolve their business models. As Mark Carney, the Bank of England governor, has just said just last month, companies and industries that are not moving towards zero carbon emissions will be punished by investors and go bankrupt. The bank estimates that up to $20 trillion of assets could be wiped out if the climate emergency is not addressed effectively. Carney said that there will be industries, sectors, and firms that do very well during this process because they will be part of the solution. WTM wants to contribute to finding the solution. This time last year, as Derek Hanekom, then South Africa Minister of Tourism, said, we live in a finite world and we cannot continue with business as usual. Back in 2015, Kevin Anderson spoke to us about the crisis of climate change. Now, most of you will remember his presentation, and here are a few words from him today.
I want today to address the role of responsible tourism in helping us alleviate our climate emergency. And I will start by returning to 2015 and the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and that committed us to take action to hold the increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees centigrade and ideally aim for no more than 1.5. And let's be clear, a 2 degrees C rise occurring in about 100 years is a huge shift to the climate that we have become accustomed to. I want to touch on two elements, impacts and mitigation, focusing initially on 2 or 3 slides on impacts and then mostly on mitigation. The Paris Climate Change Agreement, aiming for 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade, is itself unjust. We have to think that many people around the world, whether it's in Hainan in the Philippines, whether it was in Mozambique last year, or whether indeed it was in Sandy in New York a few years ago, many people are already suffering the impacts of climate change. Many ecosystems are already being stressed by climate change, exacerbated by other pollution incidents. And we already see many children around the world suffering from the impacts of climate change, and our own children will be locked into ongoing impacts as we've continued to fail to address our emissions. So many people are suffering, many people are already dying, and there will be many more people will die and suffer as a consequence of our ongoing temperature rise, no doubt somewhere between 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade if we are lucky, but could be considerably more than that. So we are locking in significant climate change by our ongoing choice to fail for future generations of all species. Let's think quickly about the impacts on the tourism sector, the more sort of near-term ones. We're going to see increased areas that are unsafe for tourists, increased military tension, potentially much more resentment of wealthy high emitters arriving in countries that are already suffering the impacts of climate change, severe restrictions on flying and other high carbon activities as those impacts become better understood, and more severe weather extremes, whether that's heat waves, floods, typhoons, storms, etc., which not only affect the holidays themselves, but also, of course, disrupt travel. I want to now bring the focus back to, well, what can we do about this? What can we do to reduce our emissions? Well, we need to understand where we are today, and that requires some humility. In 1990, the first report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was published, and that laid out pretty much everything we needed to know about climate change to help us to start to act. Yet in 2018, carbon dioxide emissions were some 67% higher than they were in 1990, and they went up in 2018 by about 1.6%. So what we've seen is almost 3 decades of abject failure to reduce our total emissions. And we can just, we often do end up just blaming India and China and other poor parts of the world. But if we think of the countries that often see themselves as more climate progressive, Sweden, France, the UK and Denmark, for example, if we include emissions from international aviation and shipping and those associated with our imports and exports, then what we see that even these so-called progressive countries have delivered virtually no reduction in CO2 emissions since 1990. So what we have had is failure writ large. So what can we do about this? Well, the IPCC tells us quite clearly that when it comes to climate change, what's important is our carbon budgets, the total amount of carbon dioxide we emit, not some long-term target for 2030, 2040 or 2050, but what we do now. That's what links to temperature rise. And if we want to limit to 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade of warming, we need to understand the science and the maths behind all of this, but we haven't got time for that this morning. So instead, I'm going to focus on the concept of pies as capturing the essence of climate change. We have a certain size pie, or as we call them in Manchester, a Manchester tart. And we know roughly that it's about 650 billion tons of carbon dioxide, there or thereabouts, that we can emit from our use of energy from now out across forever. Now, that means very little to many of you, but that's about 18 years of current emissions. With this very small and rapidly dwindling pie, we have to ask, how do we slice that up fairly amongst all the countries in the world? And with colleagues at Manchester University in the Tyndall Centre and those at CMUS in Uppsala, we have looked at what size would this slice look like for the wealthy parts of the world. And do we divide the pie on the basis of population, historical emissions, our capacity to respond, and so forth? And then we ask ourselves, well, of that slice of for the wealthy countries, how much should the tourism sector get? And from there, we can start to think, well, what would the annual reductions look like for the tourist sector if it is to make it play its fair role in delivering on Paris? Well, with a focus here on energy-related emissions, if all sectors are treated equally, then tourism needs to reduce its emissions by something like 10% every single year, starting now. That's about a 70% reduction by 2030, and somewhere around 2035 to 2040 to be fully zero carbon. But it could reasonably be argued that the tourist sector should show some leadership rather than actually relying on hospitals and schools and industries to do just as much, because tourism typically serves a relatively wealthy group in our society, at least primarily. And so you might argue that the tourist industry should be zero carbon as early as 2030, in other words, within 1 decade. So what is progressive tourism? What would that look like within a climate emergency? Well, perhaps we'd have more staycations and nearcations. Perhaps we'd have much slower travel and the journey seen as tourism. And we certainly need a rapid shift away from aviation, which cannot be made low carbon in the time frame we have to respond to Paris. We'll need longer and fewer vacations and trips. And that means that we'll have to sort of restructure some of our working environments. Offsetting is, to be blunt, a scam. It does not work once you admit you are changing the climate. That's not to say you couldn't have an increased fee as a disincentive for carrying on with lots of high carbon activities. We need a huge effort to improve sustainability right across the supply chain, whether it's on issues of food, on equity and job security and so forth. And as noted before, we need to eliminate all the CO2, that's from our planes, our ships, our hotels, etc., within a decade. This is going to be enormously challenging. We will need to think outside of the box. What would virtual tourism look like if such a thing existed? And if this is all far too challenging, well, we should have acted before. We now hear the voices of the generation that are going to suffer the impacts of our choice to fail. They are coming out loud and clear. We're seeing a wider portfolio of people coming forward and saying we need to act now on climate change. And the whole concept of flying shame and a flying conscience is coming to the fore as well. So things are changing. To conclude, in a climate emergency, will the tourism sector remain locked into the 20th century and face inevitable decline? Or will it remodel itself around the challenges of the 21st century and have a prosperous and zero carbon future? This is our choice. Thank you very much for listening.
Setting the scene. Tanya, I'm delighted you're here to conduct this discussion on decarbonising travel and tourism, and also the one this afternoon on aviation. Before you present the awards and we hear about the good that tourism is doing in the world, we need to look at the challenge of decarbonisation and what can be done. So, we know what the problem is. What is the solution? Tanya, welcome to the stage.
Simon, thank you so much. I think the message was absolutely loud and clear. My job now is to invite some panelists to the stage and ask them what they are doing and what they think the future of travel is. given the very strong call to looking a lot closer at sustainable travel. So let me first invite Justin Francis, the CEO of Responsible Travel, Madhu Rajesh, who is the Director of Tourism of the International Tourism Partnership at Business in the Community, which represents some of the big players. Please come to the stage. Jane Ashton, of course, who's Director of Sustainability at TUI. Albert Damu, who is the Manager in the area of economy in resources and economic promotion of the Barcelona City Council, who I've already seen this morning. And Saskia Grip, who's the founder and CEO of Better Places, Faraway, and also Better Places Travel. Please welcome them all to the stage. Wherever you feel. So, Justin, welcome to you all. Justin, welcome to you as well, sitting at the end there. I'm going to start with you if I can. I think when we think about the future of travel and some of the challenges it's facing with regards to carbon, aviation is top of the list. Would you just explain to us how important it is? And we'll go on to ask what can be done about this elephant in the room.
Well, I think, morning everybody. I think we heard, as you said, loud and clear, we essentially are dependent, largely as an industry, on a very old-fashioned form of technology.
Yeah.
Fossil fuel-powered aviation. And not only that, is it gets tax benefits as well, tax breaks as well. So we've got old-fashioned, highly polluting technology with tax breaks. And that's contributing to the fact that, according to the government's independent advisor Committee for Climate Change, that in the UK, aviation is on track to be the single biggest contributor to carbon emissions in the UK by 2050. Clearly, that cannot be allowed to happen. As Kevin has said, and as the UK's independent advisor has said, we need to fly less. And really, if we're honest, the world travel market and everybody here is about growth. Or, if we're being generous to ourselves, sustainable growth. And that is the elephant in the room. We cannot be growing aviation in the way we are. The price will need to go up. We will need to fly a little bit less. We will need to stay longer when we do fly. We will need to choose more responsible holidays. And finally, we need to find a massive amount of money, billions and billions and billions of pounds, to invest in the future of electric and other decarbonised forms of aviation. That's looking like 2050 for international travel and domestic travel with electric. We need to invest so heavily in that to try and bring that forward a little bit. At that point, we can fly clean and green. Between now and then, we've got a huge problem, and we've just got 10 years before we hit 1.5 degrees. So fly less, release massive amounts of funding for research and development into decarbonised aviation, get to clean and green as soon as we possibly can.
So in the film there, first of all, as you say, a couple of the figures that came out is we have to sort this problem out in the next decade. Also, offsetting is not an option. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with Kevin. In 2001, I think Responsible Travel was the first company to offer carbon offsets. And we dropped them in 2009 based on advice from Friends of the Earth, who called them a dangerous distraction. It reminds me a little bit of the Catholic Church. If you remember your history and the indulgences with the Catholic Church, the way it worked is in the old days, you used to come and say to the priest, I have sinned, it's a terrible thing, and the priest would coach you and you figure out a way to not sin anymore. And then the indulgences came along and you basically just paid a little bit to the Catholic Church and all your problems went away. Nearly destroyed the Catholic Church. And that's what it seems to me carbon offsets are about. If I was an airline CEO and I was given a choice between paying a small amount of money for a carbon offset, which would satisfy customers and regulators, or investing enormous sums of money in decarbonising, I would choose the carbon offset. And that's why the carbon offset, to my mind, has been a distraction from the real challenge, which is flying less, reducing the amount of carbon we pump into the atmosphere, and decarbonising the aviation industry.
Manu, let's come to you, and I'd like to come back to you on those questions a little bit later on. From the International Tourism Partnership, perhaps you could better explain what that represents, but also to say what are businesses doing, do you think, broadly, which is effective, or are we just seeing a suite of smaller initiatives? And what is stopping them doing more, given that we know we've got 10 years to sort this out? That's not a long time.
Sure. Thank you, Tanya, and pleasure to be here this morning. Good morning, everyone. International Tourism Partnership is an organization that currently represents 16 of the world's largest hotel chains, and as a collective, that amounts to about 25% of the industry by volume. Most of the large brands are our members, and that includes Marriott, Hyatt, IHG, Hilton, Radisson, etc. And they've come together because they believe that some of the issues that they're dealing with as an industry are too big for any one brand to be able to address on their own. So they really believe in the power of collaboration and shared solutions. What are they doing? So on the back of the UN SDGs being announced and the discussions at the Paris Agreement, the industry leadership came together to do a materiality assessment through ITP to identify common areas that they should focus on. And action on carbon was identified as a core priority. After significant consultation, we announced the ambition for setting science-based targets for all the member companies. Since then, several of our member companies, 5 if I'm not wrong, have set science-based targets, and one of them claims to be carbon neutral. And several others have announced the ambition to set science-based targets imminently. We recognize that that's only a tip of the iceberg. You know, you can set targets, but what about practical action? And that's what we focus as ITP our efforts on when we're working with members.
Do you feel the sense of urgency is there?
Absolutely. I mean, the conversation at the leadership level is increasingly louder, and what we are hearing is that the investors and owners are, beginning to come to the table, which wasn't the case 5 years ago. We heard this here at WTM just on Monday on another panel. So that is certainly there. The industry now has tools through ITP that they can use to benchmark their carbon and water usage, and most of the membership is using it. But what I will say is that, our membership represents only about 25% of the industry. We want to bring 75, the balance of the industry, to the table, because change won't happen with just the big brands working on it alone. And even the big brands can be doing a lot more, I feel. And therefore, a lot of the tools and resources that we create at ITP are made available for free. So they're solutions that the industry helps us create inside out, but then we open source it for the rest of the industry. And I would really encourage, through platforms like WTM, if you are hotel members or hotel companies listening to this, please do use them, because unless you measure your carbon and water consumption, you won't be able to manage it. So that's really important. The industry is also increasingly beginning to have conversations around a lot of the other areas that impact or contribute to the problem, around food waste, around plastics, and we are seeing some good examples coming in of practical action, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. There are some barriers which I can go into as well. A lot of times we find that the brands are in the focus because they're the ones whose logo is on the building. But actually, from an operational perspective, there's so much that the brands can do, even if they bring in efficiency or everything else that they can do in the operation. A lot of the thinking needs to come before the building is actually built, at the design stage, and that's why we are missing a big part of the jigsaw here, which is the owners and investors that need to think about what does designing a green hotel of the future look like. What is the investment that's needed? What's the payback period? What's the price savings we can achieve over the long run? And how do we work in it together, both at the new build stage as well as when you're looking at retrofits or refurbishment of hotels? So that's an area of work that ITP is focusing on, and we've partnered with the World Bank on that to build the business case and begin to bring the owners and investors to the table. So we did a preview of it here at WTM of the report on Monday. There is significant incentive from the research we've seen for owners and investors to take action, and that's certainly a direction in which we are looking at pushing the industry along.
Jane, if I can come to you. TUI has been, of course, very proactive in this area. What do you think, we were just hearing about barriers there, what are the main areas that one can go down very, very swiftly, and what are the main barriers?
Well, I think to start with, if companies aren't already doing it, we need to, as Kevin said, take stock of where we are and take stock of where each company is. So really measuring the environmental impact, so getting some robust data, then setting reduction targets, looking ways to improve, operationalizing that, and that's by that I mean integrating it into business as usual, integrating carbon reduction, environmental improvement processes into job roles, into objective setting, treating it as you do every other business challenge, and reporting on that. I mean, we found it's actually quite challenging, but also pretty effective to have public reduction and improvement targets, because then the whole business is focused on actually achieving those. So that's sort of from a governance perspective and a reporting and a monitoring perspective, tedious but absolutely essential as a starter.
Is it though a barrier for some businesses to say, well, this is difficult to measure, or we don't know how to go about it, so they wait to do that before they do anything? Are there simple things that one can simply just go ahead and do without these metrics? Yeah,
I mean, I think if you're not measuring, then it's very difficult to address, but some simple areas. I think everybody is in charge of their, has control over their premises, over their retail estates, over their office buildings. So that's a great place to start in terms of setting reduction targets, introducing LED lighting, cutting down brochure use. I mean, we've managed just in 5 years to reduce our carbon impact from our retail estates and from our offices by nearly 20%. So that's not only massively effective from a CO2 perspective, but it's also from a business perspective makes business sense. Then supply chain, hotel supply chain. I guess a lot of people here are involved in contracting and operating hotels. So we've set some pretty tough targets with our supply chain. We've made it mandatory that hotels achieve a Global Sustainable Tourism recognized certification. And what we've seen through that and through the data we gather is that that's driving real business benefits. So certified hotels are at least 10% less CO2 intensive than non-certified, 23% more use of renewable energy, 19% less solid waste, similar percentage in terms of less water use. So some real business benefits, which again, from a business perspective, cost perspective, with utilities probably the second largest operational cost on the balance sheet, some real savings. And then in terms of aviation, just to address some of the challenges that Justin and Kevin were saying, I mean, there are some real challenges there. There are also some pathways that we can already see as to how aviation can be decarbonised. So investment in latest technology aircraft. So the 787s, the 737 Maxes, which obviously aren't flying right now, but hopefully will be at some point in the future. So that's delivering immediately between 15 and 20% greater CO2 efficiencies. Sustainable aviation fuels, a great opportunity there. Sustainable aviation forecast that they could be about a third, about 30%, I should say, of all fuel from aviation by 2050. 5 pathways are already ASTM certified, so certified for use. We've got the first refineries being built in Europe next year in the Netherlands, and then in the UK the year after. So there are sustainable aviation fuels which are definitely tested. We've flown them ourselves. They performed just as well, if not better, than kerosene, but they're not yet operationalized and commercialized and developed and invested in. So big investment required there. Hybrid electric aircraft as well, huge potential.
This is all amazing technology, but what Justin was saying at the beginning is, look, we just simply have to encourage people to fly less and stay longer. Would you agree with that? Would you agree that we need to change the structure of our holidaying too, Jane?
Well, I mean, there are examples. So, for instance, our TUI Netherlands has stopped selling holidays, for instance, between the Netherlands and Paris, for instance, and only having those operationalised on trains. Our Netherlands business is doing more staycations, but let's not be disingenuous. The majority of our business is sunshine holidays for families, and for that, flying needs to happen. I think there are people increasingly saying they aren't going to fly. We're not seeing that translated. I think the reality is that there'll be increasing demand for aviation, and there'll be increasing noise about not flying, and that epitomises the challenge that we have. And there's a lot that can be done in terms of flying techniques right now, which our airlines are doing to really shave carbon impact.
You know this already, but we've got an aviation panel this afternoon. It's nice to have some backing vocals, isn't it? So, let's come to you and talk about Barcelona. What within the city, because once people come to you, are they burning a lot of carbon?
So, thank you, Tanya. And first of all, thank you for inviting a city in a debate with the industry. So I think there is no other way for us to work together between local governments and the industry. And before saying that, I want to go back to the basis, because at some point it's very important to go back to the basics. Are we in a climate emergency? Of course we are. And it's incredible that it's still needed to remark that in the 21st century, because there are still some important guys denying climate change. And it's very interesting seeing this space full of people caring about that. So the other thing, and I say that in the week in which we know that the Trump administration is officially leaving the Paris Agreement we've been talking in the video. So this is something very important. The other question for me, the basic one, is tourism industry here to stay? Of course it is. We've seen these days at the WTM. So as tourism is responsible for a part of the carbon footprint, there is no other way for us to work together. And you say, the problem in Barcelona maybe is not when the visitor is in the city, because our figure says that half of them are moving on foot, and the 30% else is moving by public transportation, because Barcelona is a very walkable city. But the thing, it comes when the visitor says, how I can get to Barcelona? So the airport of Barcelona, responsible for 85% of the carbon emissions of the tourist industry in the city, and the port of Barcelona, the largest cruise ship port in Europe, is one of the most polluted ones because of that. And I will say a figure which is very interesting. The largest cruise ship industry is responsible for 10 more times the total carbon emissions of the all cars registered in Europe. So climate change is real, it's a problem. Reducing the footprint of the tourist industry, it's a challenge, but need to be an opportunity for both, for local communities and for governments and for the industry. And you say, and I talk about the port and I talk about the airport. What we're doing in Barcelona about that, or what a government can do. First thing, adapting infrastructures and helping things happen in the industry. So what we did in the port of Barcelona, we are introducing liquefied gas as an alternative source of energy. We are not doing that alone because it not makes sense. We are doing that with the market, and we are doing that with the companies. So now Barcelona is the base of the first cruise that is moving around by liquefied gas, a source of energy. And the other thing we are doing is electrifying the port of Barcelona, because we want to ban the cruise ships when they are based in the port using fuel as source of energy. So this is one of the things we can do as a city, adapting our infrastructures and working together with the industry to produce that changes. So maybe it's the point.
But we're looking at here, we've got, as you say, people from different parts of the industry. Do you think there is sufficient collaboration at the moment, or do you think there should be more?
It should be more, because there is no other way for us to do things. It not makes sense to be in front of this debate with an anti-economic message or saying or doing this fight against the industry. This is something we need to do together. So there is no other way. You say we are talking about flights because this is the debate that Greta Thunberg introduced this year, and we need to face that in a European level. The first thing, I think that France is introducing a taxation next year for every flight ticket they are selling, but we need to do that to reduce the impact of the carbon footprint, but at the same time, we need to do that to create a fund to help our industry to change. So if not, there is no other way to do that.
Saskia, if we can come to you, the CEO of Better Places and Faraway Travel as well. Better Places Travel, sorry, let's get that sorted, I'm sorry. What do you think the best practices are in terms of decarbonising?
Yes, I think I can best comment from our perspective.
Yes.
We're not a startup anymore, we're now a scale-up. I think we have like 8,000 clients a year, and that's an advantage, I think, if you're small and you can act very agile. So I think I totally agree with Jane that you need your figures, because then you can act on your figures, and you can even measure as a small company. You don't need to be a big company. So from the start, we started 5 years ago. We started also by measuring our impact after 2 years. So we calculated all our trips. We offer tailor-made trips, so all trips are different. It was a huge challenge, but we did it, and it gave us a lot of insight. So we came to the conclusion, or we saw that 80% of the emissions of a long-haul trip is caused by the flights. So our focus then really became on the flight. And we started by informing our customers on the impact your flight has and also the choices you can make. For example, that's again TUI, if you choose a TUI flight, a direct TUI flight over a flight with 1 or 2 stops, it can be a 50% reduction in CO2 emissions. And most people don't know that.
That's a very interesting figure, isn't it?
Yeah. And so we do a lot of efforts, and I think we can only get there by our shared efforts by both the consumer, the industry, and especially the government.
How aware do you think consumers are? I mean, of course they're aware of the issue, but in terms of their travel, when it comes to travel, do you think there's something they think about much?
There's a lot of lack of information because it's complicated. What's a ton of CO2? It's so intangible. So we're really trying to get the message across, but it's difficult because people want to go on a holiday, so they don't want to think about carbon emissions. But I think the interest is growing, and we're testing a lot of different ways how to inform the customer. And I think it's really about offering solutions and alternatives and make it attractive to make a positive choice. And yeah, we're doing a lot. I mean, we did offset. We started offsetting from the start, and we're actually quite proud that we, as a small company, we started to offset on behalf of our customers. 4 years ago, we started.
What type of offsetting were you doing?
We're using gold standard credits, and we bought them in bulk with South Pole, a company in Switzerland. And we shared all our knowledge with other companies and also with the Tour Operators Association. And 2 years later, there were already like 20 tour operators in the Netherlands doing the same way. And now recently, also ATTA is offsetting or offering offsets from 2020 onwards on behalf of the customers, also with South Pole.
Justin, to come back to you, this issue of measuring and how difficult is it to measure, first of all, and to put the kind of metrics down that Jane is talking about? And also, do you have a sense that travellers understand what it is that they're seeing? Because one of the problems, I think, with climate change is that people just become bamboozled by the figures. They don't really want to look at them, or they don't really understand them.
We label each holiday. It's very easy to calculate the carbon emissions of a flight from A to B.
Right.
It's very easy to compare the carbon emissions per passenger kilometre by different types of transport. So we also label the holidays with that. And it's also very easy to look at an average household and assess what the carbon emissions from different parts of your life are. So we provide that information as well. But I don't think we should be gambling the future of the planet and millions of people and all of the world's biodiversity on the idea that a few well-meaning travellers will fly less. That is absolutely not going to solve the problem. Yes, we need to educate them, but we need governments to act. We need more people to follow France in saying we're going to put up the cost of aviation and we're going to use that money in reinvest it in train travel and other ways of traveling in a lower carbon manner. So we can't rely on the customer alone. And finally, the thing that I think will happen to the travel and tourism industry as it becomes one of, if not the single biggest carbon polluter, is other industries, other big industries are going to look at it and say, how dare you? I am doing my part. Why are you not doing your part? And governments are going to get hell if they're not tackling tourism and aviation from the motor industry, from the rail industry, from the power industry and everybody else. And that, combined with the public pressure, I think will force governments to act.
Madhu, would you agree with that perhaps some of the pressure is not necessarily coming from consumers, but it might come from other industries?
Absolutely, it might, and I think the industry is very cognizant of being positioned alongside some of the front-running industries and be recognized for what they're doing and want to be doing more because that peer competitiveness steps in as well. But I do feel, I think in terms of where and how we can accelerate the pace of action, a number of stakeholders need to come together because there are actions that each level of stakeholder can be taking, whether it's governments that look at either sanctions or incentives, as the case may be, for incorporating sustainability criteria when the buildings are built, whether it's brands and asset owners that work together on how you make an asset sustainable, looking for the industry's perspective, looking at operations and how you can operate in a more sustainable way, working with other industries to make sure there are supply chains that exist for products. So we had a very interesting conversation about IHG and Marriott shifting away from miniature toiletries, and the reason why these things take longer is because the supply chains for those products don't exist at the moment, and a lot of pressure is being put on those suppliers, and that's an opportunity for collaboration because we are all part of each other's value chains. It's more interconnected than it appears on the surface. And then when you look at travel agencies, tour operators, and corporate companies, when you're looking at booking travel, there is an imperative to ask the right questions as part of your procurement criteria. Are you questioning the hotels and saying, how sustainable are you? How can you justify it? How can you prove it with certifications or whatever the case may be? There are lots of benchmarking tools, some that ITP has produced, where you can use to benchmark one hotel company against the other and use that as part of your procurement criteria. So I feel that pressure will be an incentive to act. And then we as consumers, are we asking the right questions? Are we using the right information? There's a lot of noise about sustainable travel, but if it does not translate into the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis, whether it's to travel or not to travel, whether it's to go on longer holidays, whether it's our behavior when we are on holiday, that the incentive for companies to act at pace will come a lot more if the consumers are speaking with their feet.
Jane, it would serve the industry well, in short, to lead the way, wouldn't it? To not be pressured from, be it governments, other industries or consumers, but really to be leading the charge on this.
Yeah, I think we've got to. If we wait for consumers to take action, then I think we'll be waiting a long time. There's a lot of chatter that when it comes to actually foregoing one's annual holiday with one's family, that now is really embedded in people's, most people's way of living and what they live for every year, look forward to every year. So we have to. The onus is on us to make that as sustainable as possible, and the onus is on governments to create frameworks and institutions, financial institutions, etc., to create frameworks within which companies can take responsible actions and are incentivized to take responsible actions.
Albert, how are you communicating with tourists? Is it possible?
It's difficult.
Difficult, yeah.
It's difficult sometimes, but I think that people's mind is changing, and there is much pressure to the industry and to the governments to act on that. Before you were saying there is a need. Of course, there is a need. And let me give you an example. In the early 90s, the bridge between Madrid and Barcelona used to be one of the busiest in the world in terms of air traffic, and we reduced that by a half. By introducing high-speed train. So again, going back to what we can do as communities. And then everything starts on what you want to do or what you want to become. So in Barcelona, we decided that we want to become a sustainable destination. So this is not something we started now, but in 2011, we were the first city to obtain the Biosphere certificate, which means that Barcelona was already working on that. Now we are trying to go on a step further, that it means not just talking about sustainability, talking about SDGs and Horizon 2030. So there is a long way for us to improve what are we doing in terms, not just in sustainability, to be responsible the destination. So, for example, when I say we are not doing that alone. Yeah, okay, we were the first city in obtaining the Biosphere certificate, but we realized that there was more work needed to do. So we started creating a partnership with companies in Barcelona. So we are helping now 200 local companies in Barcelona to develop their own strategies to become sustainable in terms of tourism. So we are certificating every year a plan. So this is something that we are starting now to each company to help them to become sustainable in terms of tourism.
It really comes down, I suppose, to communicating not necessarily metrics with the tourist, but perhaps, we're coming to the awards next, which is sort of why I'm thinking about this, accolades or, some sort of stamp that says this is okay to do this. Would you agree with that? Saskia, let's ask you. Does that help to have some sort of stamp in some way?
I'm not so sure, because I totally agree with the other speakers that we won't get there by just focusing on the tourist. I really think we should. It's one thing, but we never. It's going way too slow. And I think as an industry, you can take steps, even if you're small, because besides we're lobbying our government in the Netherlands a lot about. We are totally in favor of a carbon tax, and we are against expansion of airports, and we are really active and try to work together with NGOs, with many different companies, but it doesn't stop there. So instead of waiting for our government to impose a carbon tax, we impose a tax on ourselves. And the advantage is we can decide by ourselves how we're going to invest it. So for example, we're now talking with Sky Energy to see how we can work together and use this money, which we are taxing ourselves. It's €10. It will be €10 next year. So and we're growing fast, so it's really a quite amount of money to see. Maybe we can invest it in new initiatives, and also ask our customers for an extra donation, because many of our customers they really want to have a solution, and they are willing to pay for it.
Justin, would it be an over-dramatization to say that the industry really has to lead the way here in order to survive? Because what might happen is if it doesn't, suddenly a government or some outside force will come along and impose things which are impossible to deliver upon.
Yes, of course. But what's the smart game here? Continue as we have been and get absolutely clobbered. Or what we could do is raise the price of aviation a little bit, reduce demand, stick the money we've got into funding of renewable energy. We get a little bit of pain in the short term because we fly less, but the future looks a hell of a lot more rosy. Because when we have a future which is clean and green in terms of aviation, we have a fantastic industry to be part of. So there's some short-term pain if we can get the right taxation, the right systems and infrastructure in place to release massive funding for renewables, and then we have a bright future. So there's a transition phase for the tourism industry. But just one last thing, if I might. When we talk about the tourists are not equal. There's 1% of tourists in the UK that take 20% of the flights. 1% of tourists take 20% of the flights. 10% of tourists take 50% of the flights. The problem is not probably Jane's family of 4 taking a sunshine holiday. The problem is more the person taking 10, 15, 20, 30 flights a year. Disproportionate. And something specific needs to be done to address them, and frequent flyer levy is one thing that's been proposed.
A frequent flyer levy. Do you, instead of air miles, which incentivises you differently?
They would go, frequent flyer levy would come in.
Okay. What you seem to be suggesting is that governments will be coordinating all of this. Is there a role for the travel industry to say, we will take this money and we will invest it in renewable energy? I think that's sort of what you were suggesting, Jane, isn't it?
As far as it's commercially possible to do so, I think companies are investing in renewables. So many of our hotels are investing in renewable energy. We have renewable energy tariffs for all our shops and properties, etc. But I think some of the challenges are larger than individual companies can address. Yeah. And we've got CORSIA kicking into place from next year, which is a global offsetting scheme administered by the UN ICAO, whereby airlines and countries around the world, at least from 2027 onwards, will all be involved in being charged for the growth of the industry from 2020 to 2035. So that is a global scheme which will be investing, I think, over that period about $40 billion into carbon offset projects, which is a short-term transition, I know, and in parallel, long-term solutions need to be addressed. So there will be carbon pricing, different types of carbon pricing coming into play. That's going to be a major one, which will address at least the growth during that period. It comes with caveats, and the offset projects which will be invested in have to be robust. They have to be very clearly additional to what would have been business as usual. There has to be no double counting, and all that process is being worked through at the moment. So that is a way to manage the growth in global aviation emissions for the time being. And yeah, it's the first industry sector solution on a global level.
Anybody, a final point on that? Just what the industry, so that it's not having things imposed upon it by a government. I realise that you're, probably wanting to take the lead from the state point of view, but
my vision is quite different on that. I think we need to collaborate, but each other need to do its own thing. So with the government, it's on us to regulate that. Because if not, it never will happen. So, and I don't want to say that as a message against the industry. At the end, this is a message for the industry, for helping them to change. For us, for example, I know we come from a local government, so we don't have many tools. Neither we don't have our local taxation for visitors. This is something that it depends on the regional government. We receive a part of this taxation. What we do, we're reinvesting this money to reinforce our transportation network, for example, or we are reinvesting this money to produce changes in some schools in the neighbors. So this is what we are doing, but at the end we are playing some different roles, and every one of us need to do its own. It's on the government my perspective, to manage and regulate that, because if not, it will never happen.
With that, I'd like to thank all of our panellists. I think we've got a sense now of the magnitude of the challenge and the fact that there is plenty of strategic thinking and action behind it. But now we're going to talk about companies who have been doing things, and we want to recognise for that. Please thank our panellists for me and with me before we move on to the awards. Thank you. very distinguished panelists there. We're very grateful for them coming along and sharing their thoughts. So now it is time for the highlight of the World Responsible Tourism Day. It is the World Responsible Tourism Awards of the World Travel Market. So these awards were actually held for the first time in 2004, and the purpose really has always been the same: to encourage change in the industry and to single out for recognition those who are taking responsibility. But what's perhaps changed is the quantity of the entries and also the quality of those entries. The bar just keeps rising every year. I've been involved and sitting in on the judging panel, and I notice that really what people are doing is more ingenious, it's more wide-reaching, and it's just more impressive every year. And the demands, of course, associated with climate change are also rising all of the time, and the urgency associated with this issue. We've used the words responsible in the past and sustainable, but both of these things really are just aspirations. The question is, what do you do to achieve both of these things? So this is what we're really asking when we launch the World Responsible Tourism Award application process. And it's been done in London, in Africa, India, Latin America, and in 2021 they will be launched in the Middle East as well. A lot to decarbonise our sector, of course, but as we see, the challenge is still at the moment rather seeming out of our reach. So let's see how the awards are going to work this year. We have 6 categories of awards. In each of the categories we have a gold winner, and in some cases we have silver winners too. Then we have judges awards, were created in 2018, and this year are 2 of those. We have the overall winner as well, and also we want to recognise some emerging leaders. This is very important indeed. These are businesses who are quite new to the awards. They haven't yet won, but what they're doing is very important to recognise. So without more ado, let's begin with the first category that we have. This is called Benefiting Local People. Allow me to invite Simon Press to the stage, Senior Exhibition Director, and he's going to help with presenting all of the awards, not just the first one. Simon, please come to the stage. Thank you. So benefiting local people is something that we get a lot of entries for every year, and this year was no different. And the judges really are looking to see which of the entrants are making particular efforts around their local communities, not just a few people, but broad efforts. Who was providing social, economic and environmental benefits to those local communities. I think you're getting the gist here. So the gold winner in 2019 for benefiting local communities is the Green People for the Goat Village in India. So would Mani Manish and Rupesh Kray please join me on stage, and I'll tell you a bit about this company. So it's working in the Indian state of Uttarakhand. Green People establish community-run tourism projects to support the local economy in the Himalayan regions. Much of the existing economy there is actually based around the farming of goats. So over the last 3 years, Green People and Bakri Chap have worked across no fewer than 35 villages to create the Goats Village scheme. They've set up 100 farm retreats and community-run homestays and so on. I think you're getting the picture. This is a very broad, not just a narrow, but a very broad project. So congratulations to you.
When I met you in the summer, to my heartbeat sound.
I'd like, before they leave the stage, I was going to ask you a quick question, if I may, one of you at least, it's fine. Just one of you at least, I'm intrigued because it is quite broad what you're doing in terms of reach, it's quite large. Give me an idea of maybe the biggest challenge that you've faced.
Well, the biggest challenge was that...
I think I need a microphone for all of this, don't I? And I don't have one. Haven't thought about that.
I'll try to be as loud as possible.
Okay, we're going to be loud. So the biggest challenge was?
The biggest challenge was to kind of, get the warm bodies of footfall to a god-forsaken place.
So getting staff into the area.
To the that the sort of tourism facility or those farm retreats which we created, there was no taker in the beginning. So then we came up with the option called pay what you like. So that sort of triggered some kind of curiosity among the travelers, and the initial bunch of travelers were curious travelers. What is this pay what you like, pay as you like? And then the second challenge was, of course, how to get the right kind of people, how to get people who are like sensitive about that kind of fragile ecosystem, to those places. So and and as and when the more and more destinations, the more and more villages we are bringing in the portfolio, the initial challenge remains that how to bring people over there, how to sort of
So it's a marketing
mindset.
challenge,
Yes.
and it's the curiosity, people's curiosity that you played
Yes.
on, right? We've got a microphone here, so yeah. So that's
So to create a sort of new consumer base for these type of offbeat products. This sustainability thing works either by fear or by love. So we couldn't use the fear because we are not a government organization. So we tried creating certain stimulants or props or catalysts which can generate love for these ecosystems and bring more people to experience these type of alternative holidays.
curiosity, fear, and love. Thank you very much indeed. A very good recipe, I think. Thank you. So let's now move to the Silver Award for benefiting local people, and it goes to Nicoy Island in Indonesia. So they purchased the lease actually from the Indonesian government in 2004, and it was uninhabited at that time. There are now over 100 staff, 99% of whom are from Bintan and Batam. So they get 2 days off each week and so on. You get the picture. And they've established the Island Foundation as well to support the local community. El Jenny from Nicoy, please collect the Silver Award. Now, let's thank you very much indeed and congratulations to you. Second category now, and that is, as we've been talking about, reducing carbon. Now, this award takes an even greater significance, of course, as we know in this particular year, where the tourism's impact on climate change has received more attention than ever before. So, with that in mind, the judges were looking for any part of the industry, airlines, coaches, cruise, car hire, and accommodation, where solutions have been really implemented fully and demonstrate replicable and also measurable reductions in the operation. So this year, the Gold Award for reducing carbon goes to Fainan Eco Lodge, Jordan. This is in Jordan. Now, this lodge is fascinating. It's completely off the grid and it generates no less than 100% of its electricity through a solar PV system. And that provides heating for hot water and also the lighting. But where they need extra lighting, and it does all the cooking and stuff, but where they need that, they're lit by candles produced by members of the local community. Laundry, air-dried, hot water, as I say, by the solar system. Also, there's a plan for leftover food and waste. It's converted into biogas, which is then used for cooking. And wastewater is used to provide irrigation for native plants, which then sequester more carbon. That sounds to me like an all-round solution. Nabil Tarazi, please come over and let me ask you a little bit more about Fainan Lodge. You sort of happened upon it while you were travelling, isn't that right?
Sorry, what was the question?
You came across it when you were travelling.
Yes, I have a background in the technology sector. I left my job to go backpacking. And eventually, during my backpacking, I said, do I want to really stick in the corporate world? And instead, I moved to Jordan and decided to start doing something with ecotourism. And we took over this property that was developed by an NGO in Jordan, a conservation NGO. We partnered with them to make this place a greener destination. And with that, we introduced lots of these practices, environmental practices, but we tied it with other things. We basically made this place a wholesome place where we developed an ethos to give guests unique and authentic experiences. We contribute to conservation. All the staff are from the local community, and we empower lots of local businesses, and we do it all with a minimal impact in the environment with these green practices that we're doing.
And so just our last winner, I was talking about love and curiosity. Do you think that's what drives your visitors too?
Yes, it is. I'll tell you, the visitors that used to come were coming for something a bit different. And when they get there, we do a presentation every day after dinner to all the guests to understand about our environmental practices. And we believe when they leave the lodge, lots of people will change part of their travel behavior. So next time they travel, we'll stay in a place like ours that gives back to the environment and to the community where we operate.
Thank you very much indeed. Fascinating. Thank you. So there are also 2 silver winners in this category, both really different sorts of businesses from what we've been hearing from Fane and Lodge. But the first silver winner is Les Villages Nature Paris. This is Bruno Guth, who's joining us, I think, on the stage. So let me tell you a little bit about this. It's a new mass eco-tourism destination in Europe, designed actually by Euro Disney and Pierre et Vacances Center Parcs Group. And it's located on what was previously an intensely farmed site. So they planted 28,000 new trees, 430,000 plants, and it combines geothermal, passive solar and wind-generated electricity. And 70% of the resort's waste is used to generate electricity, and the remaining 30% is recycled. Thank you very much indeed, and congratulations. So here's the second silver winner, Soneva, and Maria Paget is joining us on stage. Congratulations to you. So what's interesting about Soneva in particular, they've got 25,000 room nights per year. That's fascinating, obviously, from a commercial point of view. But what's really interesting here is that they've taken responsibility for emissions resulting from food sourcing, freight, and host and guest air and ground travel. So that's pretty innovative. A 2% environmental levy on the room rate, which funds mitigation projects that, as we were talking about before, that have paid for the distribution of 26,000 clean cook stoves in Darfur and Myanmar, and many other projects too. But I think that's an example of the sort of thing that we were talking about earlier. Congratulations to you. Well done.
On my way to that Bentley. Used to have a piggy bank, but now I got that Vega bank.
Right, so let's move on to our third category, something we've also talked about, which is transparency of reporting. So we were looking here with the judges, examples of good practice where businesses publicly report the extent to which they reduce the negative impacts or increase positive impacts. So it's the measuring and the transparency of that. So the Gold Award this year goes to TUI. So this is Jane Ashton and also Kylie Bowen. Welcome and congratulations to you. So TUI, as we know, is very well established in sustainability. It's been in the FTSE for Good for 13 consecutive years, and since 2015 has been ranked in the Leaders Band for Climate Change, reporting by the Carbon Disclosure Project Climate Change. If you'd like to come over, I don't know if you've had your photographs taken as I'm waffling on, but if you'd like to come over, why does TUI take this so very, very seriously? It is absolutely at the heart of what you do, isn't it? I don't know who wants to answer that. I think, Jane, you sort of answered it, really, but why? Where did that all start? How close is it to the central culture?
Well, actually, I think there's been an environmental department in TUI since about 1990, so it is.
Sounds like you beat the IPCC to it, did you?
It's part of the way we do business, but as we talked through this morning, there's still huge number of challenges still to overcome. But yeah, we try to present our challenges, our performance, and some inspiring case studies in the report. So thank you for recognising that.
Jane, you're welcome. Congratulations, and Kylie.
Congratulations to Kylie.
Yes, congratulations. So there is also a silver award for transparent reporting, and it goes to And Beyond.
Every kiss is a door.
So this is Lily picking up this award, Dodwell Hill, and so And Beyond are based in South Africa. They run luxury safaris, and there's a really deep commitment there to conservation and communities where it operates. It's not a listed company, actually, so you could argue it doesn't really have that level of responsibility for transparent reporting, but setting an example to us all, it does it anyway. Congratulations to you, Lily, and thank you very much indeed. Right, so fourth category now is wildlife and nature conservation. So this year the judges were looking for innovative examples of tourism businesses that have made a very significant difference locally and not dependent on a great deal of external funding to achieve that. And the Gold Award this year goes to Six Senses Lamu in the Maldives.
Maybe we're perfect strangers. Maybe it's not forever. Maybe the light will change us.
So this is Sebastian Steiger and Andrew Hall, I think. No, I don't think it is. Sebastian, maybe, of Six Senses, and they're coming to the stage to collect this award. Just a quick bit of outline here. Six Senses hosts the Maldives Underwater Initiative. So it's got on its staff, it has got marine biologists and local NGO scientists. And the centre here, the most interesting part, is seagrass. Now, a lot of companies think, well, let's get rid of the seagrass. Bad idea. It plays a lot of important roles. It's a natural barrier, first of all, against beach erosion. It is a food source for endangered green sea turtles, and it's also a nursery ground for commercially important fish species. And vitally, it also absorbs carbon dioxide. So please come over and tell us, both of you, if you would, a little bit more about it. So tell me about this partnership with Blue Marine Foundation. This is the heart, presumably, of your seagrass initiative.
So just to clarify, I'm from Blue Marine Foundation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. So Blue Marine Foundation has been partnered with Six Senses for about 3 years. And Six Senses obviously has sort of sustainability at the core of their ethos. And we came up with this campaign because together, realising that many resorts in the Maldives actively remove their seagrass bed, which is of course completely counterintuitive. It benefits coral reefs, absorbs carbon and protects islands. But Six Senses was at the core of this campaign, and they really led the tourism industry in the Maldives. So what they did is they made a conscious effort to educate their guests, take them on snorkels in the seagrass, and they proved in doing so that, seagrass doesn't mean bad business. So the campaign in the end got more than a quarter of resorts in the country to protect more than 830,000 metres squared of seagrass. So that was a space of over 3 months, and we couldn't have done that without Six Senses. So they've just done a fantastic job in the Maldives, and other resorts should really be looking to them as an example.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to you both. Thank you. So there is also a silver award in this category, and it goes to Malaysia, to Batu Batu Resort and Tengah Island Conservation.
And I tell her every day. Yeah.
So Batu Batu actually founded, and it fully funds, Tengah Island Conservation, which is a biodiversity management initiative based actually at the resort and employing full-time conservation scientists, 4 of them actually. They daily run patrols of 20,000 acres. They remove marine debris from local beaches and reefs and so on. They've released about 16,000 critically endangered and endangered sea turtle hatchlings. So this is a very broad project. This is Cher Chua Lasalri, I think. Is it? Good. Please come and tell me just a little bit more, if you would, briefly about this. So what you're doing really is supporting the diversity within the region.
Yeah, I think it's we're relatively unvisited so far.
Yes.
So the biggest fear, as in a lot of Southeast Asia, is over tourism. And these the environments, we've got seagrass, we've got coral reefs. They're incredibly beautiful. They're incredibly fragile. And I think there's very little awareness and there's very little government regulation at the moment to be able to protect this stuff.
So you're leading the way.
Yeah.
Congratulations to you. Thank you very much indeed. Right. Category 5 is coping with success. Haven't we all had that problem, yeah? And dealing with over-tourism, and this is increasingly something that people are having to think about. So this year the award was specifically for attractions and visitor sites. And the judges were looking for examples where management interventions have reduced the negative impacts on neighbouring communities and, of course, the environment. There's no silver award for this one, so this is the gold award. It goes to Park Güell in Barcelona in Spain.
Girl, you got the vibe, I'm up for the cloud. Get up, get up. Hands on your waist, let's go. Get up, get up. Girl, you got the vibe, I'm up.
So just to give you an idea of some of the metrics here, 6 million people visit this park every year. So they introduced an entry ticket to access the 1.7 hectare regulated tourist area, but if you're a resident you can still access it more easily. It's free for residents, and also, you know, it's important to include residents, and they've done that from in the park's development. That was the key part here. Eloy Badia and Xavier Marseille are both here with me now. Welcome to you. So the judges were really impressed by the way, I think, that you brought in a variety of stakeholders. Not an easy thing to do, is it? Oh, let me give you a microphone to answer that question.
Not easy because we have 9 million of visitors, and it's a green space, very important for the city, and it's a social uses for the neighborhoods, for the neighbors. So one of the success is how to make a balance between the three activities and how did they cover this space, because it's a public space for all the city and for all the visitors too.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you and congratulations.
Girl, you got the vibe, I'm up for the cloud. Beautiful as you are, I wanna light up your dark.
So there was no silver award in this category, but we're now going to move on to our final category of this year. There are more awards to come, but our final category, and that is reducing plastic waste. So here, the judges were looking for some innovative examples of how plastic waste could be reduced, and also how it reduced the volume of waste going to landfill, or just reducing the pollution by plastic waste across the destination. And the gold award goes to Iberostar of Spain. So what Iberostar have done is they have their Wave of Change initiative. What does this do? 3 pillars. They try to eliminate single-use plastics, promote sustainable seafood consumption, thereby, and also improve coastal health. And it became actually the first hotel chain in Spain to eliminate single-use plastics in the rooms of its 36 hotels in the country. And it's saying by 2020 it will have completely removed single-use plastic from everywhere in its hotels. They use a lot of recycled plastic also, and replace traditional polyester with material made from recycled plastic and other materials. So on the stage with me here, we have Firin Romero. I think I pronounced your name correctly, I'm not sure. So tell me, it's a very broad scheme. What have been the biggest challenges in going so broadly with this initiative?
well, obviously it's a huge challenge, and we heard that before, because the supply chain is not really prepared for substituting tons and tons of plastic. So when it comes to toiletries, when it comes to garbage bags and all that stuff. So it's been a huge challenge on the supply side, and we're actually very, very thrilled and proud to be here tonight, or today actually, it's not night yet. What we're going to celebrate tonight, definitely this amazing award. So I think we've reduced 400 tons of plastics over the last 1.5 years.
400 tons?
400 tons in our hotels, which is amazing. It's a really big amount. And actually, we're quite proud of this achievement. Thank you very much for this award.
And just a quick question then: how are consumers responding to this? Do they like it? How do you communicate it?
Actually, they like it very much. And what I always say is this is actually an improvement of the customer experience, because it's always a very different touch when you touch a plastic bottle or a glass bottle, or if you see a yogurt a cup of plastic or made of glass or other things. So it's actually improving and helping the customer satisfaction, which is a great match, which is actually encouraging, and which is something that we have not expected in the first place, but which is actually great to see. So our customers love it, and they support it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. So there are also 2 silver awards in this category this year, and the first of that is Kilkee. So would Killian Murphy please come to the stage?
He makes it feel like nobody else.
So this is in Ireland, of course, the Make Kilkee Plastic Free initiative, and the idea was to change the behaviours of some 25 or so businesses, rather than changing the habits of the visitors, and we've heard about how difficult that is. So they worked to secure price reductions and on replacement products for participating businesses. So basically, the replacements that they found were cheaper, and 23 of Kilkee's 25 local visitor economy businesses committed to the initiative. I'd say that's quite a bit of success. Congratulations to you. Thank you very much indeed. And the second silver winner here was Soneva Maldives. Congratulations. And this is Maria Paget, I think.
Okay. I got the keys to the universe.
So actually, Soneva was fairly quick to this, and they banned plastic straws in 1998, which was very ahead at the time. Plastic bottles in 2008, and they're working with all of their councils to try to eliminate single-use plastic. So it's an example really of the type of collaboration that we were talking about earlier, and also major ocean cleanups as well. So congratulations to you. Thank you very much. So now I'd like to move on to the Judges Awards, and for that, Harold Goodwin is going to join us on the stage. Harold, please welcome Harold back. Harold is the chair of the judges, and I can say, having sat in on their day, it was an extremely rigorous process. He's joining Simon with us on the stage to present the 2 Judges Awards and the overall award as well. So what are the Judges Awards about? Well, they're given by the judges where the business is recognised as having an outstanding award, let's start again. Where the business is recognised as outstanding, having won awards a number of times. So this year, there are 2 businesses that have been given Judges Awards. Let's start with the first one. The Benefiting Local People category. And Group Boss applied for this particular award, and it's a private nature reserve in South Africa, and it's committed to conserving local natural habitat and providing sustainable livelihoods through enterprise development. So would Ian Anderson please come to the stage?
The story of my life, I give her up. I spend her love until she's broke inside.
Just to give you a little bit of background, in 2017, this company won the Gold Award in Best Accommodation. 2019 Africa Responsible Tourism Awards, they won the In Habitat and Species Conservation category and were overall winners. So this is a really long-term global leader worthy of a Judges Award. Would you like, I sense you're not Ian, but would you like to come over anyway and let me ask you? So what incentivizes you in this area?
Well, I'm Natalie. Ian couldn't make it today. So I think, first of all, Grootbos is going to be extremely chuffed to be recognized as amongst some of the key contributors in this space. I think in 2003, when they launched the Grootbos Foundation, that really became the vehicle to drive the change that they've created in the local community and in the conservation space. So thank you very much for recognizing all the work over the years.
And thank you very much to you and congratulations. Also in the benefiting local people category, Ol Payeta also applied and it has been awarded in this category. So this is a 90,000 acre conservancy in Kenya. It employs directly and indirectly 1,000 people in tourism, agriculture and also ranching. It's really a global leader in terms of benefits to local communities. Please welcome Richard Vini and Camilla McDonnell to the stage to collect this award.
Ooh, just the thought of you gets me so high, so high. Girl, you the one I want to hold me. And if you want me, girl, you got me. There's nothing I know I wouldn't do just to get up next to you. Girl, you the one I want to hold me.
So this is very broad and just broadly making people's lives better, isn't it? I think is a good way of putting it. How would you describe what it is that you're doing?
So I would say primarily we're a conservation organization, but we believe fundamentally that conservation is as much about people as it is about wildlife.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the support of people and they don't see tangible benefit from what you do, then your ability to achieve conservation is likely to be severely compromised. So that's our ethos and that's why people are important to us.
And challenges? The biggest?
Challenge is probably people. Growing human populations and how to engage enough people to make a real difference.
Thank you and congratulations. Thank you. So what's I Hear You Cry or who is the overall winner? Well, this is a company that's been a model for others really for a decade. It's won awards already for its positive impacts on community, highly commended Best for Poverty Reduction in the Responsible Tourism Awards back in 2011 and known as the overall winner this year because of the extensive efforts they've made to further reduce their carbon emissions. The winner, ladies and gentlemen, is Fain and Eco Lodge.
If you don't keep it cool now, you never make a sound. All the lights will guide the way. If you get to hear me now, all the fears will fade away. If you get to hear me now.
This is Nabil Tarazi, right? Yeah, hi to you. Just a question really about how you've sort of put this all together and how your journey has developed, because we said you've been at the forefront for a decade. This has been a journey, hasn't it?
It has been a long journey, I have to say, because we started with a property that was developed in 2005, and when we took it over in 2009, it was just a hotel. And the whole concept was to change it from a hotel to a destination.
Yeah.
And we worked on every aspect, improving the community benefit, increasing our benefit from the environment. So it was all an ongoing process to introduce more and more technologies, more and more programs to benefit both. And we're so happy that we actually made it here today and we're the overall winner. Really, really chuffed. And the community in Finan will be ecstatic to hear that. So this is great for conservation, great for us in Jordan.
Thank you.
If you get to hear me now.
I think what's really exciting about these awards, many things exciting, is just simply the stories that people have to tell are so extraordinary in some cases. They really are an education for us all. Now, just finally, we're getting to the end now, and I don't want to stand between you and what's outside, which is some nourishments and refreshments. But just a few names that I think we need to mention, and this is emerging leaders. And the judges really want to acknowledge these because they want to encourage people down the path of doing their good work. So I'm going to invite them all on stage for a photograph. There's a few of them here, so I'll announce their name and then they stay on stage for a group photograph. So wildlife and nature conservation, 4 emerging leaders here. Banyan Tree, Vabin Faru, with the Marine Laboratory. Massively strong conservation story there. Huilo Huilo won a gold award in 2012 for conserving over 100,000 hectares of Patagonian temperate rainforest. Ras Al Khor in Dubai, a large number of domestic day visitors and tourists with good interpretation material and visitor management system as well, absolutely key. Mashpi Lodge in Ecuador, in Quito, an expedition lodge in the Andean Choco home. 50 different species of mammals, nearly 400 identified species of birds, and so on. And it plays a massively important part in underpinning that biodiversity. So please, all of those representatives come to the stage as we go along. We've got reducing plastic waste, the category for the emerging leaders. Fred Olsen Cruise Lines removed all single-use plastic water bottles from across the ocean fleet. Water to Go supplies reusable water bottles with replacement nanotechnology filters. From the Coping with Success category, there's one emerging leader there, and that is the Sedona Chamber of Commerce and Tourism Bureau. The judges would like to see some more data on the impact of the application of its sustainable plan in the future, which is very broad and impressive indeed. In the transparent reporting category, and we've talked about that, in 2019, Urban Adventures has developed a very impressive and wide-ranging tool for impact reporting there. Reducing carbon, there is one emerging leader, and that is the Ministry of Environment for the Dominican Republic, which has developed a roadmap for carbon reduction. For the benefiting local communities category, there are no fewer than 5 emerging leaders. There's Baraka Consulting, which has developed community-based tourism products in Jordan, and also Inkle Canoe Lady in Myanmar, which provides, and this is a really fascinating approach, a livelihood for village women who work in cheroot workshops. Seen pictures of that, fascinating. And finally, as next year there will be a social responsibility category, the judges wanted to acknowledge the emerging leader in that category, and it is Explore, which has worked with the German Development Agency to form a partnership to train local guides, drivers and hotel suppliers in Kyrgyzstan, Macedonia and Georgia to manage the health risk and safety there. Helton joined the Tent Partnership for Refugees and is committed to building existing efforts to manage 16,000 refugees by 2030. And Mejdi Tours, which runs tours in regions affected by conflict. Again, absolutely fascinating. So all of those names that I've mentioned, if you can remember who you are, we'd be delighted if you would come to the stage and also We'll get the gold and silver winners up in a moment. Once again, congratulations to them, but you can only win if you apply. So if you're thinking of doing that, make sure that you do make your application. See you next year. The Latin American Awards are open until December the 15th, just so that you know. And there's a chance to meet everybody outside. I'll see you there. Thank you very much.